Welcome. My name is Gina Woodward. I am the Executive Director for the WT Enterprise Center at West Texas A&M University. We do an annual webinar over Texas cottage laws every year. This year we're doing something a little bit different. There have been some significant changes with our cottage laws in the state, and so we are going to focus solely on those updates to the new laws. If you've got questions about general cottage laws, how they work, what you can do, make sure that you check out our YouTube page for some of our previous webinars. We're at YouTube/WTSBDC. So let's get started. So what are the changes? So this year, Senate Bill 541 passed, and it is by far the largest expansion of cottage food law that we have seen in the state of Texas. Cottage food laws are still kind of an infant stage as far as overall laws are concerned, especially in Texas. They've only been around for a couple of decades, and so this is really the first chance that we've had to make any major changes since those were enacted. And it really finally puts Texas back in the leading edge. Most other states nationwide do have cottage laws on the books. And really, because we hadn't had many updates over the last few decades, we had started to fall behind. I think that we're finally getting caught back up now, and you're about to see how. So in the past, if you watch this webinar with me, you know that my focus, and I think the legislature's focus as well, when you were talking about cottage laws, is specifically what can be sold. That was really how you looked at cottage laws. Reverse that mindset now, and we're really looking at what can't be sold. And it's a very short list. If it is not on the list of things that can't be sold, you now can sell it under cottage laws. So it's a significant expansion. So what can't be sold? Meats. This includes poultry, all chicken, carcasses. So if you've got a chicken carcass or like a ham bone maybe that you want to sell, it could be for pets to make soups. Those you still cannot sell. The state specifically breaks out seafood and shellfish under meats, can't do that. And then any kind of a time and temperature sensitive item that contains meat, like a casserole or an enchilada, those also cannot be sold. And the reason for this is because meat is regulated separately. It just doesn't fall under cottage laws. A lot of the times you'll find that meat is actually regulated at the federal level if it's going to cross state lines, and even at the state level, if you're not crossing state lines, it's just regulated differently. I don't anticipate that meat will ever be included in cottage laws. What else can't you sell? Any kind of ice-based product, something frozen like that. So your ice creams and your popsicles, those still don't fall under cottage laws. Canned goods with low acidic levels, those you still cannot sell. And the reason for that is when they've got those low levels of acid in the product, they're especially susceptible to things like botulism. Anything that contains CBD or THC, you also cannot sell under cottage laws. The reason for that is much like meat. Those are just regulated by a different agency at a different level. They're just simply not included in cottage laws. And then last thing on the list is raw milk and raw milk products. Same story as the CBD and the meat. They just merely don't fall under cottage laws. They're regulated differently. I can't imagine that any of those things, meat, CBD, or raw milk, is probably ever going to fall under cottage laws. So again, if you had watched this in the past, we spent a lot of time going over the things that you can sell under cottage law. This literally is the list now of things that you cannot sell. If it's not on this list, you're good to sell it under cottage laws. So one of the biggest expansions is that you can now sell time and temperature sensitive items. Before, when we were talking about cottage laws, how I would normally explain it to people is it has to be something you could leave out on the counter overnight, something that you would keep in your pantry. It's something that does not spoil easily. It doesn't require refrigeration, doesn't have to be frozen. Nope, that is off the table now. You are able to sell those time and temperature sensitive items. So your things like your casseroles. Every year when I do this, tamales always come up. I know we all like to buy our tamales at Christmas. Before, I always had to include the disclaimer, you know, everybody's grandma makes the most wonderful tamales and sells them from home at Christmas. I'm just as guilty. I buy those too because they're the very best ones. Technically, they were not supposed to be doing that. Now, under the new rule, even though they are time and temperature controlled, those can be sold under cottage law so long as they don't have meat in them. So you can't buy pork tamales, but you can buy the good cheese and green chili ones. Those would qualify under cottage law. So what do you have to do to go about selling these time and temperature controlled items? You will have to register with the Department of Health to be able to do this. You need to make sure that you are storing them and delivering them at a safe temperature. If you're going to be selling those tamales or the casseroles, it will definitely be worthwhile to invest in some sort of a cooler or an insulated box to be able to deliver those in. Time and temperature controlled only applies to direct to consumer items right now. So imagine I am going to make tamales for Christmas. I can sell directly to each of you as individuals. I cannot, however, sell to a restaurant or someone else for resale. Has to be direct to the individual consumer. It does have to be labeled with the production date on it. And in just a little bit, I'm going to show you a sample label. So all of this will make a lot more sense. And then there's a new safe handling statement that also has to be included on that label. And again, you're going to get to see a sample of that in just a second. So this is a huge, huge change. This really opens the door to be able to selling really whole meals. We do have a lot of clients that come into our office and they want to do meal prep items, but they weren't able to do that under cottage law. So long as you're prepping something that does not include meats, you could now even do meal prep. I mentioned that they do have to be labeled with the production date. Keep in mind, we're talking direct to consumer. That is only required on the time and temperature sensitive items. So if you're making a traditional item like you would have made in previous years under cottage laws, perhaps you make sourdough bread, cakes, cookies, spice mixes, things like that. Those you don't have to have the production date on. If you choose to do so, it certainly doesn't hurt anything. We've got a new safe handling statement that the health department has included in the rules that would have to be included on all of your items produced under cottage law. And again, I'm going to show you that on the label in just a second, but it's really important, this section here at the bottom of the slide, your disclaimer needs to be worded exactly like this. You cannot change a single word in it. And it also has to be in all caps, exactly like you're seeing on the screen. Another fantastic change that we saw this biennium in Texas is a significant increase on the gross revenue cap for cottage law sales. Previously, it was capped at $50,000 in sales annually. It's now been tripled and we're up to $150,000. So that we don't have to go back every biennium and ask for that cap to be raised. It will now be indexed to raise according to the inflation rate. So if inflation was to go up 10%, let's all hope that that doesn't happen. The cap for cottage law sales would also go up that 10%. All right, more good news. You are now able to sell some of your cottage law items wholesale. If you've produced under cottage law before, you know that really the original intent of cottage laws was that, you know, I as a producer could sell direct to you as a consumer. It was always that producer-consumer relationship, and that is still very important at the heart of cottage laws. But I think the legislature realized that there were a lot of items being produced from these home kitchens that legitimately could be sold at wholesale very safely. So you're now able to do that, but it is only with the items that you would have traditionally produced under the old cottage laws that are not time and temperature sensitive. So the casseroles, the enchiladas, those things you cannot sell at wholesale. It has to be the sourdough breads, the cookies, and the cakes. Again, think of it as the things that you might be able to leave out on the counter for a few days and they would not perish. those you can now sell wholesale. Where can you sell these items wholesale? It's not just anywhere. You can sell them wholesale through a farm stand. I know here in our area in the Texas Panhandle, farm stands have gotten wildly popular. I feel like even just over the last few months, we've seen a big increase in them. So that farm stand, there's one down the road from me. It's somebody local who has got chickens. She's got a large garden. She grows flowers. She has a little stand right outside her house on the side of the road, and she just works off the honesty system. That's where I go get my eggs. I go get a couple of dozen eggs and I Venmo her the money. She now can include cottage law products, so long as they're not time and temperature sensitive, from other cottage law producers. So when I stopped by to pick up eggs the other day, she actually now has pickles that another cottage law producer has made in their kitchen. You can serve to food service establishments, so that's going to be restaurants, food trucks. Just remember, only the breads, things that are non-perishable. You can sell these at a farmer's market, so you could sell them to someone else to resell at a farmer's market, and then also retail stores. So imagine that I have a little boutique and you produce a spice blend that I might want to carry. That's not time and temperature sensitive. So I would be able to buy that spice blend from you and carry it in my store. Now there is a rule regarding signage with these products that the vendors buy from you. They have to include signage near the product. It can't be at the front counter, it can't be behind the counter like you might do with a sales tax ID. The signage actually has to be by the product that's for sale, and it's got to have the language, the exact language that you see on the screen here that says that the product was produced in a private kitchen. That's to protect the consumer and allow them to make the choice whether or not they feel comfortable purchasing those items. Not on you, but the vendor does have to register with the health department in order to resell those cottage law items. And they'll just visit dshs.texas.gov to be able to register, and there's no cost for that. Labels, even though these items that you would be selling wholesale are not time and temperature sensitive, they do still have to include the production date on it. Some general labeling updates, and then I'm going to show you the actual label. You have a couple of options now for how you either list your address or an ID if you want to shield your address. I'll show you that in just a second. There's some new language for handling the time and temperature sensitive items, the disclosure that it was made under cottage laws, and then of course the production date that we've talked about a couple of times. Just remember the production date is required on any time and temperature sensitive items or foods that you're going to wholesale to another vendor, but those cannot be time and temperature sensitive. So what might these new labels look like? If you have done this webinar with me in the last few years, you know that this label looks quite a bit different. I don't think it's quite as pretty as it used to be, just because there's so much more that is required to be on the label. But if you wanted to include every single possible thing that might have to be on your label, this is what it would look like. So I'm just going to start at the top. You are still required, as you always have been, to include your business name. You don't necessarily have to have a logo like this one has, but you do have to have the business name clearly stated. You also have to include your product name. You have always had to include that. But something to keep in mind is that you need to make sure that your product name clearly describes what the product is. I've called this product cheesy broccoli casserole because there's no meat in it. I could make that under cottage laws. And remember, I could sell that to you as an individual, but I can't wholesale that because it is time and temperature sensitive. The health department just wants to see that those items are clearly labeled. So just make sure that you're not trying to give it some kind of whimsical name that doesn't necessarily describe the item. On my label, I have included a short description of the item under it. That's optional, but I think from a business standpoint, that's absolutely a best practice to have that there. And since you can't make the actual product name too whimsical, quirky, this might be where you could include something with a little bit more personality if you wanted to. So we talked a little bit about the production date that you have to have on, remember, either time and temperature sensitive items or items that you are going to sell at wholesale. Those are the two times that you are required to have the production date. But again, it doesn't hurt anything if you just chose to include that on everything, if you wanted to just make it easier on yourself. There's a few ways you could do that. If you are printing a label each time you produce a batch of whatever it is that you want to make, you can print that on there. Or you could do like I've done on this label. Everything in blue here, we're just going to imagine is something I would have written on it. You could have labels printed that have blanks for the product name and the production date, and then we'll go into allergens. And you could just write those on each time. If you're producing things in very large batches, that may not be efficient for you. But if you tend to produce in smaller batches, that's probably going to be the most efficient and economical way to do that as well. So you can write that. Allergens, nothing has changed here from previous allergens. You still have to disclose the top allergens. I think there are 9 of them recognized right now. This is another one. You could do this a couple of different ways. On this label that we're sampling right here, to be more efficient, I would print this label and I would list all of these different allergens on here that you're required to disclose. And then I would circle the item. You see that I have milk circled. I would circle the item that's in my cheesy broccoli casserole. If you are going to print a run of labels that's specific to each different item that you make, you could just print contains the following allergens, milk, and leave everything else off of it. Totally up to you, whichever way you would prefer to handle that. One of our new pieces of print of copy on the labels this year is the handling instructions. You do need to make sure that it's worded exactly like we have it here on this label. It's only required for foods that are time or temperature sensitive. So your breads, cakes, cookies, those don't have to have this. Again, if you're mass producing your labels, it certainly doesn't hurt anything to include it, but only required for those things that you have to either refrigerate or put in the freezer. One of the health department's rules for this particular couple of lines of copy right now is that you include it at 12-point font. You cannot make it smaller. I personally wouldn't make it bigger. I don't think that would upset them, but they were actually very specific that it needs to be included in 12-point font. I mentioned when we kind of first started looking at this label that there's a lot going on here. It's very busy. One thing that the health department has made it clear, I think they acknowledge that if you choose to include the safe handling instructions on your label, you're free to do that. Or you have a couple of other options if you want to pull it off and try to clean this label up a little bit. You could either include that on the receipt or invoice for those time and temperature sensitive items, or you could even print a separate small label and include it underneath or off to the side of your main label. That might be a really economical option for you if you only have a handful of items that are time and temperature sensitive and you want to keep your main label a little bit cleaner than this one that has everything. The last new thing is a disclaimer that you need to include on every label for every item, letting the consumer know that the product was produced in a home kitchen. It needs to be worded exactly like it is worded in this sample, and it also has to stay in all caps. You cannot make it lowercase, and you cannot change a single word in it. It's got to be exactly like you're seeing it on this custom label. And then the last thing, you have always in the past been required to include your home address. And that presents a security issue for some people. And I think the legislature and the health department understood that. So they've now updated the rules and you have 2 options. You can still include your home address if you choose to do that on the label, or you can go to the health department's website and you can register for a food license number, and you can include that license number as a replacement for your home address. All right, we're almost done with the updates. Donations is new this year with SB 541. In the past, under cottage laws, again, we've kind of talked about it. The original spirit of cottage laws was that I, as the producer, was providing my items directly to you, the consumer. The health department is now okay with cottage law producers making donations. That can include donation to a bake sale at a church, something for a school. It could also be for a nonprofit organization. And just remember with those donations, why you couldn't do it before, you were not there at that bake sale actually handing the item to whoever won it in the bake sale. If it was an auction, now you're able to hand that item off to the organizer of the bake sale, and it can legally be included in the bake sale. Just make sure that your label has all of the copy on it that we just reviewed. Sampling has been expanded as well. For cottage law producers, there's no additional permit that you have to have for that, and then certainly no additional fees required. You do still have to get your food handler's permit. I used to have a business that operated under cottage law, and I think I paid $6 for that. Very, very affordable. The rules that you learn when you go through that are just really common sense things like, washing your hands and using gloves, a discussion about what temperatures your items should be stored at. These are things that you probably already know and you're doing at home with your own food anyway. Make sure that you continue to follow those same rules for sampling. Seems like a given, but I'll mention it. You can only sample foods that you're legally allowed to sell. So you can't also bring your beef jerky or anything made with meat like that. It's got to be something that you can already produce under cottage laws. And I think on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some changes to licensing and inspectors. But the health department and legislature has made it clear that inspectors are still allowed to check your setup for sampling. And this just has to do with public health and safety. Imagine that you had made tamales and it was a farmer's market in the middle of summer in Texas. It might be 100 degrees outside, and you're sampling these and you don't have them chilled, you don't have them on ice. Obviously, that presents some issues with public health and safety. Those are the types of things that they absolutely can and should still be checking on. So we also saw some major changes, some acknowledgement that the legislature made to some issues that we've seen in the past for cottage law producers. I'm in the Texas Panhandle, and I'm really not aware of any major issues that we've had here. A lot of them have come from the Austin area, but this is now a rule that is statewide. So I mentioned that you do have to get your food handler's permit to operate under cottage laws. But the state has now made it very clear that local and state authorities cannot regulate your operation. They cannot come into your home unless there's an immediate threat to public health or safety. And they cannot force you to get any additional licenses or charge additional fees for what you're doing. They've gone above and beyond, making it clear that you aren't subject to any additional licensing or inspections, and said that if any officials do try to require you to get that licensing, or they try to force some kind of inspection on your home without a valid concern to public health and safety, without a valid reason, they actually will lose their employment. That is written into SB 541. So the legislature has taken that concern very, very seriously. Ultimately, why does all of this matter? Again, Texas had kind of fallen behind with regard to our cottage laws. Other states had higher limits. They were able to sell things that we were not able to sell. I feel like we have now caught up. We're on the forefront again. You can make way more food than you could ever make before under the old cottage laws. And of course, I had to include a mention of cheesecake. Every year when I do this webinar, that's always the top thing that comes up. And before, you could not sell cheesecakes. I hope none of you are leaving cheesecakes out on the counter. They are definitely time and temperature sensitive. They need to be in the refrigerator. You can now sell cheesecakes. So in addition to expanding the things that you can sell, just remember now you have some opportunities to sell items wholesale. Just make sure that they're not time and temperature sensitive, that your vendor has registered with the state. They've got signage up by your item, and you've got your production date disclosure on your label, and you're good to go. And really just overall has expanded access to these items that were produced at home. It no longer is limited to just me as an individual selling to you as an individual. I can wholesale, I can make donations. We've really expanded your reach as a cottage law producer. So that's the really quick update on cottage laws in Texas for the 25-26 years. Remember, Texas operates on a biennium schedule. So these are definitely the laws for the next 2 years. Could there be updates after 2 years? I suppose there could be. My guess is that you probably won't see anything for a few bienniums just because the updates we got this year were so expansive. If you are watching this webinar on YouTube or social media, we will also include a couple of links below for some documents that will help you with your cottage law business. And then aside from that, if there's anything that we can help you with, whether it is with your business under cottage laws or anything else small business, remember that WT and SBDCs, that's a small business development centers, that we're here to help you at no cost. You can contact us at info@wtsbdc.com or give us a call at 806-651-5151. So I hope you have a fantastic day. Enjoy your new business.